walking in a country road, and I've been chasing after my shadow.
Welcome back to the Camino Podcast, episode 108. I'm Dave Whitson.
Nobody asked me my name.
Let's get back to the Camino del Norte series. We're on to part 8 today, picking up the trail in Avilés, just west of Gijón, and carrying on to Luarca. Those are two great bookend towns. In between, it's really very quiet. The towns along the way, places like Soto del Barco, Muros de Nalón, Soto de Luiña, and Cadavedo, are smaller, lightly touristed, and all inland to varying degrees from the coast. Indeed, you won't get too much beach time on this section of the Norte. Unless, that is, you pay attention to the possible variants along the way. So stay tuned for more on those over the course of the episode. I'm joined for the discussion by Richard DeMerchant of Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, who was just on the Norte over this past summer, walking with his son. After that, we're headed to culinary school, courtesy of John Tillman of eatingasturias.com. As I mentioned to John, I have certain assumptions when I encounter a food-focused website. I'm expecting to find glossy photos and recipes, maybe some inflated rhetoric about the transcendent nature of a colorful dish. I also expect to get bored pretty quickly, but that's just me. It's not something I spend a lot of time reading about. Eating Asturias, though, is a different beast. John does a brilliant job of exploring the relationship between Asturian cuisine and Asturian cultural identity and history. In the conversation that follows, John somehow brought together ancient Rome, tinned fish, the Primo de Rivera dictatorship, Cabrales cheese, Indianos travelers, arepas, Chicago-style beef sandwiches, Oreos, arroz con leche, and who knows how many other topics. Honestly, it made me want to do a lot more reading about culinary history. So that's what's on the table for part 8 of the Norte series. Avilés to Luarca, 73 kilometers of trail time, give or take, and a deep dive into Asturian cuisine. All right, Richard. Well, let's talk about the Camino del Norte and particularly this section of the Norte. We're going to be looking at Avilés to Luarca. Before we get into the more technical stuff, let's start big picture. What brought you to the Camino del Norte? Why did you choose this route out of all the possible routes to follow?
My wife and I had done the Camino Portuguese, and we had limited time. We were both teachers. She was an administrator at the time, so we had 2 weeks, and we were going to give it a go. We did that one. It was awesome. Then we did the Camino Frances, and that was quite a bit longer. And then two of our friends here in Victoria, Jim and Dennis, who you know,
Yep.
they said the Camino del Norte is beautiful, but it's hard. It's really hard. My son was graduating with his economics degree, and I wanted to get him something. And I thought, well, what could be a better gift than actually walk in the Camino, figure out life, what you're going to do, next steps and everything. And he wanted to do the hardest one he could. So he heard the Camino del Norte was hard. So of course that was his first choice, was the Camino del Norte. So and it was really wonderful. It turned out it was probably more of a gift for me than for him.
I was going to say, that's what it sounded like to me.
Yeah. Having that much time with your adult, no longer child is pretty amazing. And we had set up rules before we left that, if he wanted to bugger off for a day or two and go with some friends, that was fine. If I wanted to, that was fine. If we walked together, that was fine. So we had set up all the ground rules before we went. And, we walked together most of the time. There was a lot of times he would listen to his audiobook and walk along and figure out life, but it was really awesome. And I didn't find it as hard as I thought it would. I thought it'd be a little bit harder, but we ended up doing the full 1,000K. We went all the way to Musia in the end, so it was great.
Who was the faster one in the partnership?
It varied. Matthew was much faster at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And as things go, he decided he was going to go for a run one day. And He ran down a hill with his boots on and everything, and he wound up injuring himself a little bit. And then he got a little bit slower. So it tended to be I was a little bit quicker most of the time. Sometimes I think he walked behind to keep an eye on his old dad. I'm not sure. But, we kind of both took turns, and it was pretty funny. At one point, he said, I'm finishing this if I have to go in a wheelchair. He said, so it was great to see his level of perseverance because I don't know that most people at 24 would necessarily do that. We had a lot of people that actually left the Norte. We
Hmm.
had quite a few people that got injured on the way. We met one lady in this section when we had met her. She had walked a longer day, and she was from, I think, Ontario. She couldn't walk. She walked a 30-kilometer day, and we would keep on running into her at different places. She'd take the bus, but she just couldn't walk anymore. She had gone too far, and she had gotten shin splints, and she just couldn't do anything. She could get off the bus, and that's about it. So, it wasn't hard, but it's that old story about slow and steady wins a race, right? So,
Yep. And yeah, it can add up if you're pushing hard day after day. So you got to be mindful of that.
yeah, yeah. I always say it's easy to walk 20K, but to do it for 30 days in a row, it's harder, right? Like the training is a little different.
Yeah, we don't have a chance to replicate that quite as well at home.
No, no.
All right, so we're carving out about a 73-kilometer chunk of the Norte today, Avilés to Luarca. It comes in just after the Norte Primitivo split. Did it feel like the pilgrim community around you had thinned out at this point?
It did actually. I found what was different between the Frances and the Norte was we went in July too, so that's
Hmm.
another key factor. The Norte, a lot of people say you went in July, it must have been really hot. The rest of Spain was cooking. We weren't cooking. It was
Yeah.
nice. So some people had done the Norte just to be there. But a lot of people from Europe come and walk a week or 2 weeks. So we didn't have a lot of people that did the whole thing. I mean, I'm sure there were lots, but you kind of get in your groups, right? So we had quite a few people that moved on, and a few people had switched to the other route, but we kept going along the coast to Ribadeo. So yeah, there were a few that walked with us. There was one fellow from Holland. He really wanted to walk alone. He told us the first day we met him, we're walking alone. And I know you saw some of the videos. He walked with us for 3.5 weeks. So, he was a great guy. He would walk ahead and he'd get our beds made up in the albergue. It was like turn down service. So
Wow.
he was a wonderful fellow. So Leon was really, really great.
No chocolates on the pillow, though, or mints, I imagine.
We did have chocolates one day. So it's pretty good. It's who you meet, right? It's
Yeah.
so wonderful. So, but because there's less people, we found people were pretty open to, a lot of people wanted to walk alone, but they also wanted to talk to people. So we'd pick up people for 4 or 5 days and then they would go back to Berlin or wherever they were from. So that part was a little different, whereas the Frances tended to be more people that walked the whole route, especially if they're coming from this side of the pond, right? It's a long way to fly.
And it is interesting to think about how summer might shift that as compared with the spring or the fall. And certainly there are plenty of other tourists that come into this area, although many fewer once you get past Gijón. Like the last part of the Norte on the coast is much more lightly touristed than some of the preceding parts.
Oh, absolutely. And if you had to walk out of Gijón, I mean, that would turn you off the Norte anyway. That's not, like you mentioned in one of your podcasts, it's not a very fun walk. It's not beautiful through there at all.
It's not the best part. It doesn't show up in a lot of the Norte highlight reels. So,
No.
our first stage here, and as always, stages are an organizational tool, a social construct. They're not meant to be followed rigidly. Avilés to Muros de Nalón, 21.6 kilometers. And you didn't even overnight in Avilés, did you?
No, we didn't. We had found that it was a brochure on the Jacobean albergues.
Hmm.
And we had stayed at the very first one, and we just loved those albergues for a couple reasons. In the early sections, a lot of the places you stay, there's surfers that have a credencial that get it stamped and they end up staying, right? But they're not interested in walking, so you don't have a lot in common with them. But the Jacobean albergues really, really focused on peregrinos, and we really liked them. And then Saint Martin de l'Aspera was just outside. So we decided we were going to walk to there. We skipped Aviles, but walking through Aviles, it was a beautiful city. I kind of wish we would have stayed There was a beautiful church. I went in and had a look, and Matthew and I were walking separate at this point. And then there was also in the square that I think it was a Saturday we walked through. There were people singing in the square and having a grand old time at about 4 o'clock. And we missed that. So that part we sort of missed. And it looked like a really, really neat city. Nice cobblestones, beautiful city, but we didn't see much of it.
Yeah, the red and black walkway through the pedestrian area into that magnificent plaza. It does have a great center. But as you say, one of the other highlights beyond the physical spaces is the hospitality in a lot of places. And so these particular albergues, the ATJ, the Acogida Tradicional Jacobeo, donation based. There's a network across the Norte, and there's a lot of appeal in staying in those spaces. So tell me about what that night was like in San Martín de Laspra.
So we went there, and at the bottom of the hill, there's a store. I can't remember if it's a Dia or whatever it is. So I didn't want to walk back down the hill later on, and you kind of want to drink at the end of the day and something salty and all that. So I stopped and I got some stuff and walked up to the top of the hill. The people we were walking with was already there. That might even have been the night I had the chocolate on the pillow. And we get up and we were greeted by Jermaine and Maria, and they were lovely hosts. And they had a fridge that was full of drinks by Donativo Fridge. So here I carried up all these drinks for everyone else who hadn't carried them up, and I didn't need to. But the albergue sat on the top of the hill, and there's a big fig tree. I don't know if you've stayed there, right?
I haven't stayed there, but I've seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big fig tree and they had a table and it was a warm day. So we sat under the fig tree, having beer, eating a few chips and just talking. And we had people, a couple young people who had just graduated from Spain and people from Italy. I think there was someone from Poland, two people from the States, and it was just a wonderful afternoon, followed by a great meal. And then at night, Jermaine and Maria said, if you want to come, we'll walk you out to the cliffside where you can see over and you can see back as far as Gijón, I think. So they walked us out with their kids, and everybody was talking, having a great time. And most people don't want to walk another kilometer and a half after they walk. I think we had done a 32K day, but they were such great hosts when they took us out, and we looked out and then we come back and we just sat around talking for a while, went to bed, and get up the next morning. They made a great breakfast, and there was a lot of photos on the wall, like with messages from different languages. So it felt very inclusive, just a beautiful albergue.
Fantastic. So well worth the extra kilometers that day.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and as you had mentioned in your podcast, they had rerouted the Camino, and we wanted to stay along the coast.
Yep.
And I think that was a good choice. It was a nice view, and of course, the time along the coast is getting shorter once you get at that point. So the chance to actually see some water was very nice.
Yeah, so much of the official Camino from here onward, well, it's technically coastal, it's inland. You can't see the water very well.
No, but we definitely enjoyed it out there. And then we didn't go all the way along the coast. We didn't do the coastal variant. We went down into like,
It's a ways to the next real town. You pass through the tiny place El Castillo de San Martín, and then you emerge in Soto del Barco.
yeah. I can't remember if we stayed in Soto del Barco, to be honest.
There's another Soto afterwards, Soto de Luina, so that might be confusing you right now.
I think we might have stayed there.
Yeah, so we'll set this up. So, moving on from Aviles, Salinas, San Martín de Laspra, you have these two options. And pretty much every pilgrim who walks this section will follow the official Camino. And it will be, 16 kilometers heading from Aviles to Soto. And on the official route, there's only one town along the way, Piedras Blancas, that has any services. So it's about 10, 11 kilometers from there onward to Soto. Pretty long stretch. You're going past the airport of Asturias, which is where some people will fly in, especially if they're starting the Primitivo. It's Oviedo Airport. It's pretty unremarkable walking. It's paved a lot of the way and not especially scenic. I mean, do you have any memories from that section heading on to Soto del Barco?
A few, but like not a lot. I mean, the one thing I remember is there was a place where we were up in the woods, and I really love the eucalyptus trees
Yeah.
and walking through the trees, and it wasn't paved in through there. It was a few kilometers. I can't remember how far because there was a lot of eucalyptus. But there's something peaceful about walking through eucalyptus trees without a lot of traffic and just kind of going. So I really enjoyed that. And I don't believe I saw a single person on that walk. Matthew had been a little bit behind me. That was really nice. That was the only advantage really of not being along the coast was you had, usually had some of these trees. There were a few places that were clear cut, but not too many. And it wasn't in this section, I don't think.
You were lucky to get there during a dry time because I've definitely heard some reports from people in this section where logging activity plus heavy rain results in some real mud in this section.
Yeah, yeah. A lot of people said that they had a lot of mud as they went through. So it was dry. Like we never had any mud for the whole walk. I would definitely want to do the Norte in the summer. I don't think I'd want to do it. I saw some pictures on Facebook right now, and it looks like a river coming down a few areas. Not fun.
Yeah, it's tricky. This was one of my project sections just because I didn't really enjoy the walk and these places where you can't be on the coast when it's right there. It feels like it should be possible. And so they have developed a route, the Senda Costa Norte, that runs from Salinas. My suggestion is to walk it a good chunk of the way, and then it's really easy to just cut down to the beach, save yourself some of the ups and downs, follow the beach around to a small town called San Juan de la Reina, and someday it's going to work out. They have on occasion had a passenger ferry that goes across the River Nalón from San Juan de la Reina across. And if that could be established again consistently, I mean, that would be clearly the winner for pilgrims because you
Yeah.
can stay on the coast, you can take the boat. But the whole problem in this section is you got to get across the River Nalón. There's one bridge, it's a ways inland. And so you walk to Soto del Barco and then you carry on to the river crossing to get to Muros.
Yeah. And like you said, that section doesn't stick out for me for like, I don't remember a whole lot about that section.
Understandably so, because after you finally make it across the river, it's a climb up first, a little bit of a dirt road, but you always kind of have the highway to your right as you climb up the hill. You finally enter Moros de Nalón at the top of the hill. You cross the highway, climb a little bit further. Small town, a small plaza, tree line, church on one side, some shops going around the right. Not much else to it other than a couple pilgrim albergues.
Yeah. And that place sticks out for me because of the lady who hurt herself. That's the
Mm.
third place I think we saw her, and she had gotten a bus there and had stayed that night. But yeah, she was just hoping to get better to keep on walking. There's a nice church there and there was a service that day. So, but that's all I really remember of that place. Not a lot.
There's not a ton to be said about it. There's not a lot of deep history to dive into, at least that we have access to in English. And it's nice that, 10 years ago, there wasn't anything there for pilgrims. And for a time, there were three albergues. I think it's down to two at the moment, but it's nice to have seen it develop in this way.
Yeah, there are a few restaurants there though, I think in the plaza.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so you can get services there and they were open, so that's nice too.
And even a good sized supermarket. And there aren't a lot of those in this section, but there's one on the highway that was just built a couple years ago. So yeah, never want to overlook a good chance to get food.
No, no. We found a lot of supermarkets on the way. I think that was the advantage of going in the summer. Most things were open. We had very, very little trouble finding stuff. There were some sections that were longer where there just weren't towns, but when we hit a town, even on Sundays, some things would be open, which I don't remember that for the Frances or the Portuguese. So,
Yeah, it's more and more common for supermarkets to be open on Sunday mornings, at least these days. The second stage that we'll organize around is always a tricky one. You'll see guidebooks struggle with this. A lot of guidebooks will go with a 40-kilometer stage in this area to Soto de Luina. I don't, much to the consternation of the accommodations in Soto de Luina. I've gotten a number of angry or concerned emails about this over the years. So we'll go Muros to Cadavedo, also a long stage, 35 kilometers. A couple organizational reasons I break it down this way. It's a tricky stage to sort because You have the opening stretch to Soto de Luina, and then you have a really, big decision to make in terms of the route. So what do you remember from the first half of this section heading on towards where you probably overnighted in Soto de Luina?
I think we did overnight in Soto de Loiña. We stayed at a place underneath a big bridge. That's in Valdez, I think.
Oh, Hotel Hostal Canero.
Playa de Cueva?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the albergue in the hotel.
Yeah, is that area or is that after that area? I can't remember.
So you're saying that you would have gone from San Martin de Laspra? That's too far. There's definitely a stop in between.
Yeah, where did we stop?
In Soto de Luina, there's another Jacobeo albergue, a Donativo. There's a pretty large public albergue, but there's also El Pito. You didn't make the detour to Cudillero, did you?
I think we did actually.
Did you stay in Cudillero?
That had the really nice building in it, I remember. Like with big long lawns.
That's El Pito.
That's El
El
Pito?
Pito is the town right before the detour to Cudillero. So you might have stayed in El Pito and then walked down to Cudillero, because that's where the Renaissance gardens are.
Albergue La Concha?
You stayed in Cudillero. Yeah, you stayed in Cudillero.
I bet we did. I don't remember.
That's the name of the albergue that was there.
Is it?
Yep, absolutely. So let's set this up. It's a little grungy when I stayed there. Definitely one of the grungier places. They served a very cheap breakfast in kind of an empty kitchen. When I arrived there, the guy was playing games downstairs, like video games in the front room. Nobody stayed in the front room on the bottom floor, so you immediately climbed up. There was kind of an outdoor patio off the roof or near the roof in the back, but you may have just not spent any time in that albergue.
No, we were south of Cudillero and we stayed at, I think we walked into town and stayed. Is there big gardens and then you go into town and there's something?
So El Pito is about 1 kilometer outside of Cudillero. So you could have stayed in
Yeah.
El Pito, dropped your bag, and then strolled down to Cudillero to check it out.
It seems like a long time ago.
I see here you have a stage where you walked to Soto, that you stayed in Soto de Luina.
Oh, I know where that is. That's the albergue that kind of sits off the road a little bit.
Yeah,
And then you go down and there's that Mexican place. Yeah, I remember that place. Yeah.
sweet.
It's the order of them that's harder to remember.
Well, at least we know the next two because it's going to be Soto and then it's going to be Canero.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a long day that day. We were tired. It was a hot day. The restaurant was called Bamboo House.
I've never been there at night. I've always passed through Soto de Luina in the morning. So I know where I go for breakfast in Soto de Luina. There's a hotel that's always open pretty early, does a good job. Tell me about dinner in Soto de Luina.
So we had stopped and there's two places there. There's a church, and then outside of the church, there's a statue. And the statue has a pilgrim standing up with the hat and the staff and everything, and then a pilgrim sitting down, more modern with the backpack. And then right beside it, there's two restaurants. One is called Bamboo House, Bambu House. And it's kind of a funky little place to eat. And then there's a second place that's more of a regular kind of cafe bar. And we had arrived and we went to the cafe bar, had a burger in the afternoon, and then later at night we went to the Bamboo House and we had pizza. So it wasn't a bad place. There, the albergue, it's not Donativo, but it's like 10 euros or something. It's a pretty cheap albergue. It's a big albergue too. So quite a few people were there. It had fairly decent facilities, but the person working shows up at 1 and leaves at 4 or something. At least that day they did. So you had to get in at the right time, and when it fills up, it's filled up. It wasn't too bad, if I remember right. Not much else for services. It was a Sunday when we got there. So the pharmacy was closed. There's a pharmacy in town. It was closed. There was a DIA in town. The DIA was closed. There wasn't much else there. There was a second albergue that a few other people stayed at. It sounded like they were very similar. It didn't sound like one was any better than the other. But it kind of sits in this little valley and there's a river in the valley. Yeah, it's a beautiful little spot.
It's one of those places you walk into and you think, I can see why someone wanted to settle here. It
Yeah.
just has that quintessential snug little valley where everything just looks pitch perfect.
Yeah, and I think it would have been interesting during the weekday when there was a little bit of activity, but the weekend it was pretty quiet. And the little stream runs between the albergue and the restaurant. So you would walk down from the albergue and then go to the restaurant. But it had good facilities for washing and hanging out your clothes and it was nice warm day, so everything dried really well. I mean, we had nice weather the whole time. I think we only had rain for a couple hours out of 38 days.
I mean, I can see why you were tired. It's one of those deceptively tiring days. Sometimes you just scout the elevation profile and draw some quick conclusions. And there's not really an ascent that goes much above 200 meters in the profile. So it's easy to dismiss it as an easy walk. But I counted just now 7 different climbs. And,
Yeah.
100 meters of elevation may not be terrible, but you do that 7 times over the course of the day, and you're going to be tuckered out at the end.
Yeah, and you're probably getting close to 450K in. So, the knees and the hips and everything's a little bit sore. So, yeah, I remember us being tired that day. And I know Matthew's feet were sore from, when he had run and his ankles and everything. So, yeah, it was a longish day. We were glad to get there.
There are some nice parts of the walk to that point. In El Pito, it's a small town, there are Renaissance gardens. You're not going to see a lot of Renaissance gardens on the Camino del Norte, and there they are. So that's a really neat little moment.
Yeah, it was pretty. I remember everything being like neat and tidy. Like I don't remember seeing a lot of garbage and really anywhere on the Norte. A little bit more in some of the touristy places, but it seemed to be cleaned up in the morning. Later in the day, if you arrived a little bit later, things wouldn't be quite as neat as they were in the morning. But yeah, I remember things being pretty neat and tidy in this town. So
I've become a Cudiero evangelist. Cudiero is a town that is a little over a kilometer off route from El Pito. For me, it is maybe the most perfect little beach town on the northern coast of Spain. It is just tucked into this snug little alcove on the coast. You have steep cliffs going up both
yeah,
sides that houses have been built onto, the church perched in the middle. It's just a delightful little spot.
yeah, it's very nice.
And kudos to you for squeezing that into the middle of a long walk. That is dedication.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing I noticed a lot on this section was the bridges.
Mm.
Like if you're an architect, these bridges are fantastic.
And you're not talking about Romanesque, I think. I think you're talking about expressway bridges, correct?
Express, yeah, they're
Yeah.
huge. Like they're massive. Like I'm just looking at a picture now here. There's kind of a railroad bridge that sits down, and I think this was in near Cudiero, railway bridge, and then looking over to the other side, there's this huge expressway bridge with a big turn in it. That's a 4 or 6 lane bridge that you walk under, and you're looking up, and it's massive.
It is. It's really impressive to see.
Yeah, and then the little town kind of sits somewhere in the middle of them, and you get to walk under and see them all. So it was really cool.
Yeah. So you made it Soto de Luina, you spent the night, and then leaving Soto, you have a big decision to make because, there are a lot of variants in here. This is one of the more official variants. There are scallop shells pointing in both directions after you leave Soto. You can follow a route that's labeled Bayotas, which stays closer to the coast, or you can turn left and go with the higher level approach, which is really your best chance at something kind of resembling a mountain. It's still a hill, but it's
Yeah,
mountain-esque, and it's the biggest climb you can have in this part of the Norte. What did you go with?
that is a great question. Yeah, you go up by the highway here, don't you?
Yep.
Yeah, so we climbed up and then we went up and crossed the highway. And then we kind of went on the coastal side for quite a ways.
And it's a route where there's kind of a rural highway that is running through the different towns that you pop into. And the Camino consistently will go up to the highway into the town, and then it immediately forks off onto a trail going through woods. It drops back down a ton of distance, then it climbs back up to that little highway as it approaches the next town. And that pattern repeats throughout this walk.
Yeah, we went down into Novena,
Novellana.
Noviana. Yeah, we went down into Noviana and then Playa de Ribeira del Mulin. We
Yeah.
went out to there by Castañares.
Yeah, this is a chance to get back onto the water a little bit.
Yeah.
Definitely not consistently, but at a couple points.
Yeah, there was a couple points we could see some water when we went through here. Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting because people will look at these two options and they'll think, well, there's the high level mountainous option. That sounds really tiring. So I'm going to go with the other option, the one that stays near the coast. To me, there's no discernible difference in the physical challenge involved. The Biotas, the coastal option, it's really strenuous. It's up,
Yeah.
down, up, down, up, down. The difference is that the high level route, you just have one sustained ascent going all the way up to the top, and then you tip over and you go straight back down the other side. People have been actively discouraged over the years from doing the high level route. There have been times when I've walked the Norte where that entire scallop shell on the signpost where the route split happens has been covered up and sort of an insistent no, 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 don't do it. At times, the trail has been a little bit overgrown. The way markings have been either damaged or just worn down by weather. So it's a route that you'd want to have GPS tracks for as a backup, but it is probably the best views that you can have of the second half of the Norte along the coast are possible from that mountain. But that said, I don't think there's a clear, obvious choice in terms of which is better. They both have their virtues. And one of the big ones with Biotas is, along with the great forest walking, is that you actually have services during the walk. You have
Yeah.
some cafes to hit along the way. You don't have that on the high level. You are just on your own, no food, no water the whole way.
Yeah, actually, I remember this now. I see the sign because I took a picture of the sign. Our main reason was the services because Matthew's feet were sore, and if something happened, there was no out.
There's not a lot of bailout possibilities on that route for sure. So yeah, that was prudent.
And I don't think many people were going that route. I don't remember talking to anybody who was doing that route.
I think I've seen two other pilgrims on that route over the years. Yeah, it's very rare. And then you end up in Cadavedo at the end of this stage, and Cadavedo is fine. It's a tricky place right now in terms of accommodation. The municipal has been closed for repairs for a while, and it had been pretty badly neglected over the years. The private one that had been there for years, that also just closed last year. It's a moment where we're waiting to see what happens in Cadavedo.
Yeah, for sure.
But you did not overnight there. You continued on that day.
Yeah, we did.
And so that brings us into the last stage, so Cataveda to Luarca, which is 16 kilometers. Take me back to this stage, and you stayed like right in the middle of it,
Yeah, we stayed at Albergue de Cueva.
which is part of Hostal Canero. So it's the hotel that has been on this route and has been in place for a very long time. They added a small albergue a few years ago.
Yeah, and it was kind of around the back. We had a little trouble here. This was one of the only places we had trouble because we phoned ahead and I had made reservations for the three of us. And we thought for sure we had reservations, and they said we had reservations. But when we showed up, we did not have reservations.
Weird.
Yeah, so we arrived in time though to actually get three beds. So we were pretty lucky. Leon had gone ahead and had made sure we had our three beds, but we were two people away from not having a place to stay, which meant a lot longer walk that day. But that hotel, there's a huge bridge over the top of it, which is really funky. You could wash your clothes and stuff, and they had a nice place to dry. And then we walked down to the beach, which we were so used to these beautiful sandy beaches everywhere, and that beach was not a beautiful sandy beach. It was a rocky beach,
Yeah.
so and it was a stormy day, so it wasn't a good day to swim or anything. So that was the only thing we were a little disappointed in. But there was a nice river there, and there were lots of kids paddleboarding and canoeing and kayaking and all kinds of stuff in the beach. But we didn't get to go swimming, so that was kind of a downer.
But it is a good place if you can't find a spot in Cadavedo or if you just don't want to stay there. It's completely on its own. There's no town around it. It's
No.
just the Hotel Albergue has a restaurant and it backs up against the woods and the beach is just down a footpath.
Yeah, and then the next morning when you wake up, you've got a bit of a hill to go up the next morning, but you've got a good start on the next day. We didn't mind staying there at all, so it was a nice place, and mostly Peregrinos too. I would say that was the trickiest part about the whole Camino was finding a place with mostly Peregrinos and not tourists, because just a different feel, right? We didn't mind that place at all.
And then did you follow the official Camino from there onward to Luarca?
Yeah, we did. We didn't actually stay in Luarca. We went through Luarca. Luarca was really cool, and I kind of wish we stayed there because it reminded me of a Newfoundland town here in Canada. It's a port town, and you kind of go down, and there's both sides of the port, and all the buildings are there. It was a really cool little town. Like I'm looking at some of the pictures now, it reminds me a lot of Newfoundland. So we really enjoyed that little town when we went in. We had crossed the river, and there was a little bakery, and right beside the bakery there was a street. You know how they have the umbrellas over the street?
Yeah.
So we had a cafe there, and we met a nice British couple that were going all through Spain with their camper van. And they had this camper van map, and they really thought we should have this camper van map, which really wasn't a big help, but because we weren't carrying camper vans.
Yeah.
So we took their camper van map and off we went. But it was a nice little town. I wish we would have kind of stayed there, but we were worried about getting into Santiago. We thought we were on a timeline to Santiago, and it turned out we were walking too fast because we were walking like 35 Ks a day, somewhere between 30 and 35K for a few days. And then we had to cut back to about 14 to 15 for 2 or 3 days towards the end in order to slow down to make our reservations. So we didn't time it as well as we could have. But you don't know what's ahead, right? So you
Yeah.
gotta go
Hey,
with what you got.
it's nice to bank some extra kilometers and then have it a little bit easier on the back end.
Yeah.
Luarca is kind of like a bigger Cudillero. So if people know Luarca, just imagine shrinking it down and you kind of end up with Cudillero. This is one of those where the last time I walked, I discovered an alternative right from that beach you were talking about behind Hostalcanero. It's another one of those local routes. It's called the Ruta de la Congresa, and it goes entirely along the coast, along cliff tops onto Luarca. It's basically the same distance as the official route. The official route is not the least bit interesting. It is mostly paved, kind of a meandering approach into town. This is one of my new big things to promote on the Norte is don't follow the official Norte from Hostalcanero. Head to the beach. You can find the local waymarks. They will take you right into the center of Luarca.
Oh, was that right?
So next time, Richard, you'll take the coast, you'll stay in Luarca.
I think next time I might do that. Yeah.
And for everyone listening, please, I understand why people would not take the Senda Costa because that adds a lot of kilometers from Salinas. That's a really hard sell. More kilometers, more work. You're certainly going to have more work if you take this variant into Luarca. There's more ups and downs. The official Camino, once you clear that first hill, is pretty flat the rest of the way. But the scenery is gorgeous, and like you said, there aren't that many opportunities left to be along the coast.
Yeah. And at the top, once you get up that hill and you cross the highway, it's kind of all eucalyptus trees, isn't it? That's been cut. And
There's a patch of eucalyptus, and then you cross back over the highway, and it's kind of like long sprawl outskirts of Luarca.
yeah, I think I remember that.
You're not going to suffer, right? Like you're not going to be miserable, but there's a better way.
Certainly having done Camino del Norte, the first time everything is new, right?
Yeah.
The second time you're kind of going, how can I get some newness in this?
Absolutely.
So you kind of go, okay, I sort of remember where I'm going. I think I'm going to try this other way and see how it goes.
This section we're talking about, these 73 kilometers, it's another one of those parts of the Norte where you could walk it twice and only overlap 10, 15 kilometers along the way because there are so many places that you can split.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's the most beautiful part of the Norte by any means, but you're not suffering walking this section,
No,
I wouldn't say.
no.
It's not super hard, but it's not super easy either. Just plan out your day that you're leaving and you have enough time so you're not feeling stressed out at the end.
Well, thank you, Richard. Thanks for taking me down memory lane and walking back through these three stages.
Oh, anytime. It was a pleasure.
John Tillman, former executive chef and also former dishwasher, is the creator of Eating Asturias, a massive compendium of insights into Asturian cuisine with nearly 400 articles on the subject. You can find John and his site, conveniently enough, at eatingasturias.com. John Tillman, thanks very much for speaking with me about this topic. It is surprisingly difficult to find an English speaker to talk with about cuisine in Asturias, but you are clearly the guy, so I appreciate you making the time for this.
I think I'm the guy because I'm the only one. I have found in Asturias a very small handful of other English speakers, but most of them are not here for the cuisine.
It helps that you not only have exclusivity, but you also have quality going for you. So it's nice when those two things align. To start, I don't even have to come up with the question on my own because you ask it yourself on your website, Eating Asturias. I figured it was as good a way as any to start. How did a small town cook from Appalachia end up in Asturias?
Well, it is kind of a long story. The website has all of the long version, but the short version is I married a woman who is from Valladolid in the center of Spain. And in 2014, we went on sort of a grand tour where we took a car and drove all over the center and the north of Spain. And we started in Barcelona, ended in Galicia, took several weeks. And when we got to Asturias, I was struck by how similar the landscape and the climate and the people were to where I was from in southern Appalachia. And that sort of got me interested in digging into why I was seeing echoes of our foodways, that we had some things we shared that I didn't really understand how exactly could have happened. But during that trip, we had a conversation in which I said to her, if we ever moved to Spain, this is where I would want to live because it's just like home. And later, circumstances conspired to make us decide to leave and to move to the EU. And we didn't really look any farther than here. So we've been in Asturias now since 2017.
I had never made that connection before, but now that you bring it up, Appalachia, Asturias, I can see it. The landscape, mining history. And I spoke with a historian from Asturias once whose book is titled Asturias Never Defeated, that talks about just sort of the resistance streak that runs through the region's history. All of that lines up.
Yeah, there were so many miners who immigrated from Asturias to West Virginia and the rest of southern Appalachia that at one point the Spanish embassy to the United States was located not in Washington, D.C., but in Parkersburg, West Virginia.
No way.
Which is the beginning of a story about how the food in Appalachia and Asturias ended up being very, very similar.
That's fascinating. Keep going down that track. What are the big similarities?
Asturias is the only place that I have found in Europe that has the same kind of like corn-based cuisine that Southern Appalachia does. We make our cornbread very differently, but Asturias is full of what's called bronio, which is essentially like a slightly different way of making the kind of cornbread in a cast iron skillet that is common in the Appalachian Mountains. Same kind of like no sugar. In the rest of the southern United States, you get this rectangular pan of kind of sweet, kind of cakey cornbread. And in Appalachia, you get this thing that is basically a giant arepa made in a cast iron skillet. And it's very similar in Asturias, except that Asturias also has an additional influence from South America. And so what you have here are tortos, the maize, which are exactly arepas. And you find them in bars here served with picadillo and fried eggs. So Asturias has this very eclectic set of culinary influences from both North and South America.
What was the first meal in Asturias that really stuck in your mind?
It was actually on that trip in 2014. I know exactly where we were. We were in a bar called Chigre Lorpayo in Arenas de Cabrales, which is the town that has given its name to the famous blue cheese from Asturias, the Cabrales. And I had the aforementioned tortos con picadillo y huevos. And it was the middle of February. Absolutely, we were the only tourists. in the entire town, much less the bar. But all of the locals were very not just curious about why on earth we would want to be there in February when it doesn't do anything but rain and you can't even climb the mountains, but interested in sharing their culture with us and teaching me how to pour cider properly. And that was sort of where that conversation about if we end up in Spain, this is where I'd want to end up, because it's simple food cooked simply with people who are not pretentious about their cooking. Very proud of it, but not pretentious about it in any way.
At what point after you moved to Asturias did you decide, I'm not just going to enjoy Asturian food, but I'm going to write about it? I'm going to start eating Asturias.
It was pretty quick. I had spent my entire career in restaurants and had gotten to the point where, yeah, you get the title chef, but then that just means you're the guy with the spreadsheet and you're not really doing a lot of cooking anymore, and you're worrying about payroll and do I have to go and get my cooks out of jail sort of thing. And that was about the time that we started having kids. There wasn't really anywhere for my career to go other than being in the kitchen even more. And so I made a conscious decision that I'd rather be a father than a chef, because it's nearly impossible to do both at the same time. And I wanted to keep my hand in food related things. And so there's this pattern in my life, I guess, where when I'm in between things, I tend to like pick a weird hobby and make a website about it. Over the decades, I've done it like 3 or 4 times with just truly weird topics. I don't know. I had a catalog of all of the traditional pubs in East London at one point, and one about the history of pipe tobacco. So it's just sort of a thing that ends up happening. For me, it's been really good because it's been a way to meet people here that would otherwise have been difficult to meet without being in the restaurant industry. So I still get to sort of orbit inside of the hospitality industry without having to spend my every waking moment in a kitchen.
Was there a particular topic that really pushed you forward where you were just so excited to write about it and go through the process of learning about it and putting together an article, where for you that stands out in the early days of eating Asturias?
Yeah, the history of cider making in Asturias and why the culture around it is so very different than the culture in the Basque Country, even though the techniques and the methods of making cider are identical between the Basque Country and Asturias. The cider itself, as it comes out of the barrel in the spring, is identical, but the culture is very, very different. And how that becomes a story about Asturian immigration. Not having the kind of fishing fleet that the Basques do, there was never an idea amongst the Asturians that they might ever get to go home. Whereas the Basques, when they went to sea, knew they were coming home in a couple of months, and the Asturians had to take their cider with them. And so Asturian cider ends up in bottles in order to provide proper cider to all of the Asturians in Mexico and in Argentina, while their apple orchards there are coming into maturity.
Wow.
And prior to that immigration, the culture had been exactly the same as the Basque sacerdotea and drinking only from the barrel. And now that's a thing that's reserved only for special occasions in Asturias.
That's a great detail. What are 2 or 3 dishes that you see being quintessential Asturian cuisine?
Okay, so this will be very much from the point of view of living in Asturias as opposed to what is promoted as emblematically Asturian. So the emblematic dishes are the fabada and the solomillo con queso cabrales, but as far as the things that people really, really eat here that you don't see eaten other places and are enjoyed by everybody, you have carne gobernada, which is a very, very simple beef stew. It's made year-round, usually served with the ubiquitous fried potatoes. But in Asturias, it's always made in quantities that are too large, so that there's always enough leftovers to make the bocadillo, the carne guisada, which for Americans, this is a Chicago Italian beef.
Okay.
So the Chicago Italian beef sandwich, it exists here. We do the same thing, stew the beef too long until it falls apart a little too much, and then like throw some more peppers and onions into it and call it a sandwich. Quintessential workman's food all over Asturias. That's the proper, I work in a steel mill lunch. And then the second is the Rollo de Bonito, which is Bonito del Norte or albacore tuna, which is by far the favorite piece of seafood in all of Asturias. In Cudillero and the area around it, they make a filling of piquillo peppers, onions, tomatoes, hard-boiled eggs, and then sort of like held together with some breadcrumbs, and then the fish is rolled around that, and then you either slice it into pieces and pan fry them, or you pan fry the whole thing to get a crust on the outside of it. And that's very after church kind of proper Sunday lunch. And then the quesadillas. And quesadillas are the absolute grandma's house dessert. Everybody's grandma has a recipe. Everybody's grandma makes them. They all say they're the best. It's basically if you were to make a short crust dough with white wine and anise as in place of most of the water, and then wrap that around a filling of like walnuts or chestnuts with butter and sugar, and then deep fry them as these like almost cannoli shaped pastries.
I would have expected you to spotlight the fabada here, so it's really interesting to hear that there is this gap between how the locals experience their cuisine and what is promoted. Can you explain how this happens, where a dish becomes marketed as the Asturian dish when it's not actually reflective of locals?
I'm not going to say it's not reflective of locals, but it's very difficult to answer this question without getting into politics in Spain.
Okay.
Particularly early 20th century politics. But the first dictator, Primo de Rivera, wanted to have a French-style culinary nationalism. And following the French model, the goal was to take emblematic regional dishes from all of the different regions of Spain and to put them together into one cookbook that would sort of become like the Bible for Spanish cuisine. So you get cocido madrileño. He actually has, at this point, someone who was a famous food writer at the time write a whole book about how oranges from Sevilla are very good and should be eaten because no one in Spain ate the oranges. They were all for export. So everything you think of like Sevilla oranges and all of this is all invented by Primo de Rivera.
Wow.
As a conscious piece of nation building. And so fabada is one of the things that was chosen from Asturias because there's a whole complex of these dishes in Asturias that are generally referred to as pote, which just means the pot that they're cooked in. And they can be more or less baroque, depending on how much money you have and how much time you have to make them. And so at their most baroque, they're very, very similar to cocido madrileño, where every piece is served individually. But fabada is the simplest in that it's just the 3 or 4 meats stewed in a pot of white beans. So it's the most approachable to people that are not from Asturias, whereas like the pote that is eaten most commonly in Asturias also has berza, which we know as collard greens, chopped up and stewed with them, and some potatoes from Galicia, and it gets more and more baroque as you go. There's an older version that's made with chestnuts in place of the potatoes. And so fabada is a very approachable version of this complex of stews, and it's very good, and everyone here likes it. But I don't think if you gave the average Asturian the choice on any month other than the coldest winter months, so from like December to March, there's a lot of fabada and pote eaten, but a thing like carne gobernada is eaten year round.
Okay.
And so it's a little more emblematic of how Asturias actually lives. I also didn't talk about arroz con leche, even though everybody in Spain loves the arroz con leche from Asturias because it's cooked too low and too slow for too long, and it becomes almost creme caramel. It's very, very sticky and very thick, unlike the arroz con leche and most of the rest of Spain. I'm much more interested in these things that are eaten at home as opposed to what's easy to present in a restaurant, which is where you get a lot of fabada, because fabada is a very easy dish to cook in enormous quantities and serve on a menú del día, and it keeps for days. It's not as delicate as something like arroyo de bonito, where it's based on a well-prepared side of fish, and tomorrow it has to go.
Gotcha. There are two big branches of the Camino that pass through Asturias. The Camino Primitivo goes inland towards Oviedo. That's where you really get a lot of fabada on the menu. And then there's the Camino del Norte along the coast, where seafood becomes way more prominent. And you've already mentioned bonito. Is there anything else to note about the kinds of seafood that tend to be on offer in Asturias, or anything of interest in terms of how they're prepared?
I think the thing that's most interesting about seafood in Asturias is how much seafood is eaten. Like, people are like, yeah, they eat a lot of seafood in the north, but the statistics are that it comes out to something like a kilo per week for every man, woman, and child in Asturias of seafood. It is wild how much seafood people eat here. And if you can haul it out of the ocean, Asturians eat it. Like, the local refrain is, the uglier the fish, the sweeter the meat. And so it does not matter what it is. If you can haul it out of the Bay of Biscay, El Mar Cantábrico, it goes on the menu. But to me, the most distinctive thing about seafood in Asturias is the incredible variety and very, very high quality of canned seafood. Throughout Asturias, in every large grocery store, and most of the small ones, the array of shellfish, boquerones, large fish, flounder, tuna, everything is available in cans in 3 or 4 different kinds of sauces, sometimes just in the sea salt. There's a place outside of Cudillero, Aza, that packs everything in a smoked butter. So you can get like sardines in smoked butter and mejillones in smoked. And for me, if I were walking the Camino, I would skip all of the cured sausages and fill my backpack up with tinned seafood. All the way through Asturias, I would be eating tinned seafood. That's by far the most local thing about the seafood. That, and then that, unlike a place that has a very small coastline, where you get like one particular way that seafood is cooked in that area, there's so much of it consumed here that it goes in everything. It's not unusual to see what would otherwise be an expensive piece of seafood just tossed in a soup pot.
Even with that advice, there are still plenty of pilgrims out there that are going to stick with sausage and cheese as their trail snacks, along with a fresh baguette. And Asturias has you covered there as well. And you've written about both of those topics: local cheeses, local sausages. What should pilgrims have an eye out for on those fronts?
As far as sausages go, the really interesting thing in Asturias is that the climate makes it incredibly hard to make a dry cured sausage. It's nearly impossible. It's much like in Mexico, there's no jamones of Spanish style, regardless of how long Spain was there, simply because the climate doesn't allow for that kind of curing. And so what you have in Asturias is an incredible variety of fresh sausages that have to be cooked before they're eaten. The most common are the chorizo ahumado, which is a local smoked chorizo, which to me is very, very reminiscent of the kind of sausage that you get in the southern United States from a good Mexican butcher. And the second is the morcilla matachana, which is the local version of the Spanish blood sausage. In the rest of Spain, usually morcilla is the one from Burgos, where it's made primarily of rice. And in Asturias, the rice is replaced with caramelized onions. So the sausage is not just a little bit softer and it can be almost scooped out of the skin with bread, but the savoriness, the umami, is just through the roof, because it is literally nothing but pig blood and caramelized onions and salt. And so it's a pate. It's not really even a sausage at that point. It's just a pate that was cooked in an intestine. And along those lines, if you really wanted to find something truly unique, there is a sausage in Asturias called sabadiego, and its name comes from the word for Saturday, sábado. It's made in Norteña, and it was traditionally the thing that was made on Saturday morning. So the hog slaughter usually started on the Matanza. It would start usually in the middle of the week. You would confine the pigs on the weekend before to start purging them, and then you would usually kill the pigs on Tuesday or sometimes Wednesday, and then by Saturday, everything had been made. All of the sausages had been made, everything that was going to be packed in oil was packed, and everything was going into the smokehouse for the year. And on Saturday, you would make a sausage with the bits that were left over. And this is Sabadiego. And it essentially is a chorizo and a morcilla all together. So you would use the last of the blood to make a blood sausage, but instead of having a cheap binder, you would use the remaining ground pork as your binder. And so you get a chorizo and a morcilla at the same time.
Wow. What about on the cheese front?
Cheese. Everybody knows about the blue cheeses, particularly Cabrales, but Asturias has an enormous variety of cheeses. You can get some really great sort of French style runny cheeses. There's one called Cueva de Yonin that I am absolutely certain someone stole a cheesemaker's notebook in Camembert and ran away with it, and they've just reproduced it here. But one of my favorite is Tres Leches Rojo. So one of the big things about Asturian cheese is that we love to make cheese with 3 different milks. So a lot of cheeses, including Cabrales, are made with a base of like 50% cow milk and then varying percentages of goat and sheep added to that for their different qualities of flavor. The Tres Leches Rojo, it's made in Pria by a cooperative cheese-making company there. But it's a semi-hard cheese that has been inoculated with the same blue cheese molds as are used in Cabrales. This is a popular type of cheese making in Asturias. So there's these tiny little veins of blue cheese that you find sort of as surprises inside of what is otherwise a kind of like semi-aged sheep's cheese. But this one, the Tres Leches Rojo, what makes it unique is that during the kneading of the curds before it goes into the mold to be matured, they add pimenton. So they add paprika to the curds. So you get this like bright orange, almost cheddar looking cheese that is not cheddar. It's going to taste like spicy blue cheese and spicy pimenton all at once. It's got a lot of goat flavor to it, a lot of paprika flavor to it.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. Along with all of the discussion of food, when I first see a site called Eating Asturias, I'm imagining Instagram photos and recipes.
Sure.
You go much deeper than that. And for me, the most interesting part is where you discuss the relationship between food and culture, and you bring this ethnographic lens to bear on Asturian culture. And you've already given us some examples of that in the discussion thus far, especially around fabada. This feels like an impossibly broad question, but I want to throw it at you and see where you go with it. Can you talk a little bit about how food offers a window into cultural identity, and then what Asturian cuisine can tell us about Asturian identity specifically?
Okay, I can give that a shot. We start with I am absolutely convinced that food is the best way for anyone who is not a social scientist to understand a foreign culture, because food is universal. Absolutely everyone has to eat. So we have this common denominator. So we can as amateurs, we can do some comparative ethnography without having to get permission to do studies from our advisors. And we can compare how people eat in the same situations that we find ourselves in at home. If you work a blue-collar job in the United States and you go to Paris, you can go and you can find a factory or a hospital, and you can look across the street and you can go to the cafes that are across the street, because that will tell you what your counterpart in Paris eats. And from that, you can kind of look and see, oh, well, there's more bread, there's less pasta, there's these sorts of things. And then that, if you're curious, you can sort of suss out historically why that might be true. I'd add that the drive to be hospitable is also a human universal. So the way that we share food with each other, the way our restaurants are organized, the way we take care of guests is another sort of bedrock comparative. Secondly, if you're into home cooking, how a culture preserves its food, we'll tell you everything that you need to know about its climate and geography. I talked earlier about how there's no Spanish air-cured hams in Mexico because the climate simply wouldn't allow it. You get north into Arizona and you get back into the same kinds of air curing that you have in La Meseta in Spain, where you can get you can get carne seca, which is very similar to what they have in Leon here. But in Asturias, you have how beans and corn later are dried and stored. In both Asturias and Galicia, these give rise to the Oreo, which is like an emblematic piece of the countryside. When you walk through Asturias, when you're on the Camino, you see the Oreos, these four-legged warehouses 2 meters off of the ground, and that's to store beans and corn in a climate that is very, very damp. And so being off the ground and having airflow underneath them is incredibly important to having your year's supply of food not go rancid. And that leads into like the staple crops of a region, because the staple crops tell us about a place's history. In Asturias, that you don't have to look very far. Food culture in Asturias is cider culture. And that cider culture wouldn't exist without having waged such a fierce rearguard action against the original colonialists that it took 6 Roman legions to subdue Asturias, and it took 150 years and the Caesar himself coming. And that's why you have Roman apple orchards everywhere, because apple cider is a Roman invention and it was part of the pay of a legionary. And so everywhere that people were difficult to pacify, you have a cider culture. And that's the history of the region. The rapid spread of corn from the New World as all of the Indianos came back and brought dishes with them. They went to the Americas. They would come back home and they would bring arepas. They would bring cordero. We have a thing here that everyone loves to do during the summer, cordero estaca, which is to take young goats and splay them out and roast them, which is Argentinian. In Argentina, they do it with whole cows. And that Argentinian connection is so strong that every Asturian restaurant and most Asturian homes probably have a bottle of chimichurri sauce. The love of the shared culture with Argentina, so it's that, but also food is a social language. It shows us how people can relate to each other. We can compare our table manners and our etiquette. That shows us how we present ourselves to other people, what kinds of restaurants we want to eat in, show us something about how we view our own community. A lot of the English-speaking world, we don't go to a restaurant where we eat the same thing that we eat at home. We want to try something new, have something different that's from somewhere else. I think it's being, at least in the United States, being a nation full of immigrants, I already know what my neighbors who are exactly like me eat. But my neighbors who might be from Vietnam, I don't know anything culturally about them. But if I can go and I can eat their food, I start to learn more about their culture. And Mexican food now in most of the United States is as American as a hamburger or an apple pie. And it's that we did that acculturation through food. The thing I was struck by in Asturias most by this is that people you have never met will wish you a good meal. You will be sitting in a bar in Asturias having a meal, and depending on how old they are, people will walk by you. They walk in the front door, they take their hat off and they say "Que aproveche" or "Buen provecho," depending on what generation they're from. Not from the waiter, from someone who's just walked in the door and is going to the bar to have a beer. And that tells me something about how outward looking people are and how willing to interact with strangers. Not just Asturian, but the average Spaniard is. They're very, very willing to look outwards and welcome people into the way they eat and where they eat. And it becomes, even when they don't know you, that's now a communal experience.
That was an awesome answer to an impossibly broad question. So thank you for that. And I'm sure people listening can tell that you are a fantastic resource. It's not just that you're the only one, but you're damn good at it. Your site is an exceptional resource, 397 articles and counting. And you also offer some support services to people traveling through the region. So if a pilgrim was passing through and wanted to be able to dive more deeply into the food around them, what's the best way for people to reach you and what might that entail?
Okay. Well, I'm not shy about it. My email address, my phone number, everything is on my website. I have absolutely no problem getting a WhatsApp message from a random person in Gijón that is literally, I just showed up here and I don't know anything. Where can I find something good to eat? Where can I have a beer? I have no problem answering these kinds of questions. Maybe one day, if tourism becomes as massive as it is in a place like Sevilla, I might have to change my phone number. But for now, it's fine. In addition, on a very ad hoc basis, I give some food culture tours here and there to visitors that are curious about the topics we've talked about today. Generally, this is in the form of walking tours in the sort of like the three big cities in Asturias, Oviedo, Gijón, and Avilés. But I can organize events for tour groups, very popular. I very much enjoy doing that because we can have an espicha, we can go to a yagar, and you can get the whole experience of having what is essentially a potluck, Asturian style, with a lot of cider, or visits to small producers that are not otherwise available because they don't keep regular hours. There are plenty of cider makers that, if they were breweries in the United States, would be like the weird cult breweries that, if you know where they are, then maybe you can go and you can find somebody that knows where they are. We have that here too. It's just they're all cider makers. But anyone who's interested in any of these things or has, questions, my email address is all over the website. It's absolutely easy to just get in touch with me. I usually respond within a day or two, unless the email demons are acting up, and then it can take me a while. But yeah, I'm easy to get in touch with.
I learned something from every conversation, but I might have learned more in this one than any of the others, which is partially a reflection of my absolute ignorance when it comes to culinary topics, but also a reflection of just how much you brought to the table. So thank you very much, John. I really appreciate you making the time for this.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
My conversation with Richard was a reminder that the most difficult question I'm ever asked on pilgrimage isn't why are you on the Camino or what do you want to do with your life, but rather, where did you sleep last night? Nothing makes my mind go blank faster. I'd be better off with a calculus question. Okay, so as is the custom, let's talk about the variants on this section of the Norte. First, it's probably fair to acknowledge that my enthusiasm for alternative routes can sometimes make me too critical of the official route. As Richard pointed out, the official Norte through these stages isn't actively bad or unpleasant. That said, I don't find it to be especially captivating. There may not be a low floor, but there's also not a high ceiling. But you've got options. Okay, that first stage, Avilés to Muros de Nalón, 22 kilometers. The official route stays inland. As you've heard in each of the last two episodes, the old route dipped down to the coast in Salinas, and overnight options exist both there and in San Martín de Lastra. This can be a pretty short alternative, adding just 1.5 kilometers over the official route. That said, if you're not going to overnight in Salinas or San Martín, or pursue the other alternative that I'm about to mention, it's probably not worth it. You still have to go a little further out of your way just to reach the coast, and then you're just turning right back around to get back to the Norte. But there is that other alternative. From Salinas, a local route known as the Senda Costa Norte is a very different proposition. This climbs high onto the hill overlooking Salinas and the coast, and then generally follows along a ridge overlooking the coastline. It passes through the old mining town of Arnau, as well as the Playa de Santa Maria, with services available in both places. While this is more strenuous and involves some ups and downs as it follows that ridgeline to San Juan de la Reina, it's also possible, and I recommend this, to drop down to the beach and instead have a few kilometers of flat, easy, sandy walking. Now, this is a vastly superior walk to the Camino del Norte through this section, but it comes at a cost. It's 6.5 kilometers longer, And of course, it's harder as well. You've really got to want to do it. But if you do, you'll be rewarded. Okay, second stage, Muros to Caravedo. The small variant here is the detour to Cudillero after El Pito, which will just add 1.5 kilometers, more or less, to your walk. If you have the budget, consider spending the night in Cudillero. With the albergue's closure, you'll have to spring for a hotel, but it's one of the most delightful places on or near the Norte. They even have an ice cream shop. After that, you'll have the big choice, which Richard and I discussed. The Norte splits with the Bayotas option moving closer to the coast, while the high-level option climbs to Pico Paridiela and then comes right back down. Nearly everyone takes the Bayotas approach, which offers regular services and some lovely forest walking. If you dig mountains, views, and solitude, though, consider the high-level option. Just be prepared. Parts of it can be badly overgrown. Waymarks have, on occasion, been damaged. There are no services. And it actually shoots past Caravedo, meaning that you'll have to backtrack along the Norte a couple kilometers after you rejoin it if you want to overnight there. You've got to prepare if you want to take this option. Last stage, Caravedo to Luarca. Look, if you're exhausted or injured, or if the weather's terrible, follow the Norte all the way through this short stage. Otherwise, though, join that footpath from Hotel Canero to the beach, and then follow the Ruta de la Cangresa from there to Luarca. It's a dramatically superior walk along the coastline pretty much the entire way and often off-road. It's only 500 meters longer. It's a delight. Do it. That's all for this episode. Thanks again to Richard DeMerchant and John Tillman. Be sure to check out eatingasturias.com, whether you're in Asturias and want to eat like a pro, or if you're at home and want to cook like an Asturian. All episodes of the Camino Podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, and YouTube. You can reach me at caminopodcast@gmail.com and through the Camino Podcast Facebook page. And you can support the pod on Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Wilson. Back next week.